here is a little video with some feedback on your exam papers. So, first of all, here's a quick sort of overview of probable reasons for why you got the grade you got. So this is not 100%, but it will give you some indication of why you got the grade you got. So of course, if you got 12, that means that you presented your theory really well, you did a nice critical presentation, your analysis used the theory to dissect important and concrete issues, and your further actions are good and they are based on your analysis. And finally, the learnings that you presented are good, personal, concrete learnings. If you got 10, then it's like you did the same as if you got 12, but maybe the future actions were a bit too generic or not quite based on the analysis. If you got 7, it is again as the above, but not only your future actions were not so good, but the theory you presented maybe are not a good match for the issue you analyzed, or maybe you had some misunderstandings of some of the theoretical concepts. If you got 4, then your theories were probably not well presented and not criticized well. Some of the theoretical concepts might have been seem to be poorly understood based on your text, and as a consequence, of course, then your analysis and your suggestions for future actions will not be so good either. If you got 2, then your theoretical concepts are probably quite clearly misunderstood. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. And your questions are not answered sometimes, or maybe they are just answered in a very superficial way. If you got 0, then you must have had severe misunderstandings of theoretical concepts, and as a consequence, your analysis and suggestions for future actions must have been poor. And -3, nobody got -3. Good. For the so to go a little bit more in depth, then for the presentation of the theory, there were I think that our review session must have really paid off, because most of you are doing this quite well, both with the presentation of the theory and sort of demonstrating nice critical awareness of the limitations of these theoretical frameworks. I think mostly where some of you go a little bit wrong here is that sometimes you get almost a little too excited about the critique, and it's like you are trying to you seem to be very eager to give critical points, and then sometimes the critique you give is not so good. For example, saying that a theory simplifies reality isn't in itself a good critique. That's exactly what theories are supposed to do. Similar, some of you criticized the 4-player model, saying that one would need to practice it before it becomes really useful. And this, again, is not a very good criticism. Most things that are worth learning are you will have to practice. So then there's something about some of you say that criticize certain theories because they don't explain certain things, but this is not necessarily a good critique, because it's only a good critique if the theory claims to be explaining something and then doesn't explain that thing very well. Otherwise, you might criticize a theory. You can't really criticize a theory for not explaining something that it does not set out to explain. And then finally, some of you criticized the theory so severely that afterwards one wonders, why did you even, if you think this theory is so poor, then why are you using it for your analysis? Okay, so if we move on to the analysis, then I see in general 3 main problems that occur in the analysis sections. Either the analysis stops too early, or you don't give a reason for why you choose the particular theory you chose for your to use in your analysis. And sometimes, because you are not clear about why you use a particular theory for analyzing the issues you have chosen to analyze, then there is a poor match between the issue that you have chosen to analyze and the theory you use for this analysis. So if we look at these 3 points a little bit more in detail: stopping the analysis too early. Sometimes you might point out an issue and describe it using the theory, but you do not really explain it using the theory. That means you use the theory to say what happened, which is good, but you don't use the theory to sort of explain why this happened. So an example of this is here. Someone writes, "We did not manage to create a sustainable belief system due to our lacking ability to engage with our viewers and subscribers. One way we could have done so would be to open more up towards inviting our subscribers into the conversation in order to integrate them in the community that we intended to create." This is a good observation, but don't stop the analysis here. Try to find out why this happened. Why didn't you invite these subscribers into the conversation? Maybe you can go deeper in the analysis there. That would be good. The next one, not giving a reason for your choice of theory. I'm actually a little surprised at how few of you gave explicit reasons for why you chose the theory that you used. That is, how few of you argued your choice of theory. So here's a quote that I have chosen not because it lacks such an explanation, but because it's actually a very nice example of how you, in a very simple way, can argue for why you have chosen a specific theory to use to analyze the issue that you want to use, or the issue you want to analyze. So here it says, "To me, the PSOC seems the most relevant theory for internal community building, and that is why I chose it for analyzing issues that arose in our work with the YouTube channel. Even though we could have made good use of primal branding framework to make our brand stronger externally, I believe that the main reason for the potential success that we missed out on were internal, and that they are best explained by relating to the PSOC construct." So this is a perfectly good and simple explanation for why this student has chosen to use the PSOC framework and not the primal branding. So yeah. Of course, it is not so much a problem that you don't give an explicit reason. As long as you have a reason, it doesn't really matter that much that you don't write exactly what your reason is. But when you don't write explicit reasons, it might be because you don't have explicit reasons, and then there might well become a mismatch between the theory that you present and the issue that you want to use to analyze that theory, analyze using that theory. So, for example, here's an example. It's from the Five Guys group. So one of the members identify an issue, which is lack of motivation. And then he writes that many of the students in the group, they were engaged in establishing their own businesses, and that the ambition for the group members to establish their own businesses outside the university conflicts with the ambition of excelling inside the university. And then the student goes on to analyzing this shortcoming by using primal branding. Now, this illustrates both the first and the last issue. The first issue is illustrated because this analysis stops too early. The problem doesn't actually seem to be that the group members are busy outside the university, or even that they lack motivation. If they are engaged in establishing their own businesses, they are probably people who are quite motivated for something, at least. And so I believe that if this student had gone further in the analysis, maybe he would have seen that the problem is actually an unchallenged assumption, namely the assumption that doing coursework and doing external work necessarily has to be in conflict. It is because of this assumption that the group never reflects upon whether the work with the YouTube channel could be an integral part of their external work with establishing their own businesses. They could, for example, have created promotion videos for their respective organizations, or they could have interviewed each other about their efforts to create the new businesses, and then used the work with the YouTube channel as a way to giving each other feedback. There are many ways that it's possible to integrate the two so that one doesn't have to take time away from the other. So it would have been nice to continue the analysis and then sort of surface this kind of assumptions. So the analysis stops too early. The second problem is, of course, that when you look at an issue of motivation, personal motivation, it's a psychological issue internal to the group members, and then PSOC would probably have been a much better theory for the analysis rather than primal branding. So there's a mismatch between the theory and the issue the theory is used to analyze. Okay, so moving on to the sections about suggestions for future actions. Here there are three main problems that I saw coming up in many of the papers. The first one is using one theory for the analysis and then using another theory for future actions. Now, the third question states that you should give suggestions for future actions based on your analysis. So, of course, if you use one theory for the analysis and then another theory for your future actions, then you are not basing your future actions on your analysis. And then you are not demonstrating that you can apply this theory to solve real-world practical challenges. So usually this happened when there was a poor match between the issue that you analyzed and the theory you used for the analysis. The second issue that I saw popping up again and again was that some of you based your future suggestions for future actions more on sort of private beliefs and your own personal common sense instead of basing it on the theory and the analysis. So many of you saw things right. You could use the theory to diagnose the situation in a good way. And this is, of course, very good. But you lack the ability to use the theory to formulate concrete ideas for interventions that you could do yourself. Yes, as I said, many of you fell back on talking about how you could manage the organization and the teamwork, which seemed to be unrelated to the theory that you have used. For example, a lot of you correctly identified problems such as decreasing motivation or mismatch of expectations about the project between the group members, or a lack of psychological sense of community in the team, or a lack of certain types of speech acts in the team. And this is all good. But then some of you turned around and proposed that maybe we can just solve all of this by having a designated leader who can take care of these issues. And this particular proposal for a future action doesn't actually come from applying the theories. The point of Isaacs and Cantor, for example, are that anyone can take the leadership role, and that they give a lot of good examples of how this can be done in practice. And so it is, it would be, if the future suggestions should come based on your analysis and the theory you use for the analysis, it should relate to these suggestions, these practical examples that are given in the theory, rather than sort of some ideas for how to address the issue that is just based on your private beliefs and your private common sense. Um, the third issue that I saw coming up a lot of times was that your future actions, you were just saying that you should do what the theory tells you to do. And saying that you will do what the theory tells you to do is not suggestions for future action that is based on the analysis. You could easily have said that without doing the analysis. So, for example, some of you suggest that as future actions, you suggest that everybody should practice the 4 dialogical skills, or that you should practice your ability to read the room. And this is, of course, basically just saying we should do what the theory tells us to do. Similar, some of you have suggested that in the future you should work with the 7 pieces of code from the primal branding. And again, this suggestion is not really based on the analysis. You could have given the suggestion even before you made any analysis. And furthermore, it is also not telling me why didn't you do it already during the month between getting introduced to the theory of primal branding and the end of the course. So there seems to be something missing in your analysis or in your understanding of the issue. So I have a couple of concrete examples of this. The first example, the student writes, the YouTube channel's outcome, I think, could have been even better if the followers were better at communicating our beliefs about what we wanted to the content to contain. A little bit funny sentence there. A concrete example is vlog number 2, daytime drinking, where I had a personal wish of starting the video with us explaining the purpose the purpose of the video must be, and what is so special about Danish bar culture. I did not voice my opinion and just went with the flow. The outcome of the vlog had the humorous aspect, which is central for the video and overall concept, but I believe that we did not state the purpose of the video clearly, which resulted in the humor drowned out the content of culture. I believe that we could easily have incorporated both elements, but due to my/our stuck behavioral tendencies, I did not voice my opinion. What Cantor 2012 Level 1 action stances does not discuss is the ability to break free from the structural pattern and stuck behavioral tendency. So in this piece, the issue is identified, namely that the student has the insight that they need to communicate their creed in all videos, that the group needs to communicate the creed in all videos, but he says that he does not voice this insight. Since this is the issue, then I think dialogue would probably have been a better theory for the analysis, in particular because Isaac discusses at length what one can do to address the issue of not voicing. So by looking at those practices that Isaacs discuss, the student would have been able to come up with much more concrete future actions for how he in the future could voice opinions. I also think, as a side note, I can say that I also think that there might be something missing in the analysis here. Why did he just go with the flow? Why did he choose not to voice this opinion? That would be interesting to know. So example number 2, the student writes, over the coming year, we would have everyone observed themselves in the group and identify the type of player they tend to be when they speak. Furthermore, we would look for common behavioral archetypes. The observations would be articulated and talked about in the group. The observations made would have been articulated and talked about in the group. By observing and then recognizing these structural patterns, we would now be able to respond to them in advance and stop it from becoming self-sustaining and force certain sometimes undesirable or undesired outcomes. When individuals of the group would identify the players they tend to be, it would be easier for us to stop being stuck in ritual impasse and move away from the current destructive structural pattern. Okay, so, well, practicing this is of course in general a good idea, but here I would have liked to see something more concrete. Now, what would it look like to this particular practice? How would you ensure that everyone observes themselves and identify the type of players they tend to be? Some of you mentions that you could do this in team building days. You could do this by bringing in a facilitator. You could do this by repeating the exercise of recording your conversation and analyzing your conversation together. And of course, all of these things are good suggestions. But when you come up with such suggestions, you must of course also deal with the issue that this is going to take a lot of time. And how are you going to balance the time that you use on these kind of exercises with the necessity for having a lot of time to, if you're in a startup, for example, to develop your product or your service? Good. Then the third example that I'll give about the future suggestions, the student writes, both developing the 7 pieces of the primal code as well as partnerships would support Answer Me in creating a community that will be so passionate about our success they create themselves. However, it would also be important to continue to develop a strong internal community with the Answer Me team. In order to do so, I would look to Boyd and Novell and apply their psychological sense of community framework to assure each team member of Answer Me felt membership, influence, integration, and fulfillment, and shared emotional connection. This would be an essential action, as if the team of Answer Me doesn't believe in what we are doing, then how could we expect our other surrounding us to do it, to believe in the channel? Building an audience and therefore community must simultaneously occur internally and externally. So once again, this is basically just suggesting that in the future they should do what the theory tells them to do, but it does not say anything about how this is going to be done in practice. And as a side note, I can say that here the student kind of throws in all the theories. And of course, if all you have to say is that you are going to do what the theory tells you to do, then that doesn't take much space. So then you can easily just pile on the theories. But if you had gone into some more concrete details and come up with the concrete suggestions based on the analysis, that would of course have taken so much space that you would only have had space enough to deal thoroughly with one theory, namely the theory that you had chosen to analyze the issues. So, rounding off, maybe I can say the personal learnings. I think most of you actually did quite well in this question. You came up with some very good learnings, and I'm very happy about it. And of course, it's also very interesting for me to see what learnings you come up with, what you value, because it gives me an idea about which of the exercises I definitely have to keep for next year, because they gave a lot of people good insights. So I hope this feedback video is useful, and I hope that you have a good understanding of why you got the grade you guts. So yes, maybe I'll see you around, and good luck with the rest of the OIE master. Bye bye.